everybody. Welcome. I'm Howie Howard from Mr. Furious Records. And today on Dat Fury Radio, joined again by MC Reach out of Kansas City. What's going on, Reach?
What up, man?
Hey, so last week we talked about Kansas City hip-hop history. This week, you've got a discussion question for me, so hit me.
Yeah, so there's always discussions about hip-hop and what the forefathers for hip-hop are, right? And so I think you can find roots, hip-hop's roots in jazz, in funk, in soul, in R&B, in disco, right? There are a number of different genres that have informed hip-hop. But if you had to pick one that hip-hop is most derived from, which genre that came before hip-hop would you say?
Ooh. That's a big question, and I'm gonna take a second to think about it and tell. I'm so glad you mentioned disco, because just today, it'll be a while till the listeners hear this, but just today, I was listening to a podcast on the Chris DeMakes a podcast channel. This is a guy from the punk band Less Than Jake. And this was actually a throwback episode that he had originally recorded a few years ago, but it was Darryl McDaniels talking about It's Tricky. And DMC was really went into how influential disco was and how disco had obviously the drum breaks and the bass lines that he and his friends needed to rap over, and really went into how I'm assuming probably a lot of the listeners know kind of the history of disco a little bit and the backlash, and I thought he did a really great job of like talking about how important disco was to his music. So I'll link to that episode for people. I strongly recommend people go check it out. It was really cool to hear him talk about that and dissect It's Tricky and talk about where the vocal rhythm came from. And I mean, they went kind of verse by verse, and really excellent podcast. Now, I've dissembled enough. Pick one. Strayed. I'm gonna give a personal answer. I mean, I love all kinds of different hip hop, but one of the things I love the most, and that most of the things I love has in common, is the drums. I love the drums. I want to hear a snare on 2 and 4 and wherever else, but I want to feel what the drums do to my body as a really important part of the experience for me. I'm kind of a beat forward listener. If the beat's not doing it for me, it's really hard for me to get into the song as a whole. And I appreciate that, like, sometimes amazing vocals might not have the best beat, and I appreciate that on a more intellectual level. But the stuff that I love has a beat that I can just feel before the vocals even happen. So my personal answer, I'm gonna go with funk and the drum breaks that form the foundation of some of my favorite beats. But I don't think that is a answer for everybody. I think that's just my own personal answer. Do you want to answer your own question?
Yeah, so I think there's so many things about each genre that informs hip hop that gives it a piece of its identity. As you mentioned, the funk, very important to drumming, right? I would probably say jazz. I think there are ways in which jazz has given hip hop ideas and a foundation in terms of melody, also in terms of timing, which I think also speaks to drumming. So yeah, I would probably say jazz for me. But hip hop is the child of many different genres, and it's hard for any one genre to lay sole claim to it. But there are certainly some that have informed hip hop more than others. But yeah, jazz for my money.
That the tapestry has to be the official answer. That is the identity, I think. But I really like your answer of jazz in an additional sense, which is kind of the philosophical sense. Jazz is so much the music of freedom in music making and improvisation and momentary expression and rule breaking, but also at a high formal technical level. So this combination of raw expression and the chops and the compositional complexity, and that combination of freedom and technicality, rawness and technique is something I also see in hip hop that I would say comes much more from jazz than anything else. I can't think of another thread that would come so much from.
Yeah, there are lots of lineage ties. I did a class, like a short class on the connective tissue between hip hop and jazz a few years ago. A buddy of mine and I went to KU and shared it with a friend who was an AFAM professor there at the time to his class. So just great to show some of those links between them. And many of them are so deeply rooted that you almost get that feeling. Like you go back and watch old videos of Ella Fitzgerald scatting, like there's some hip hop DNA in there. And you can tell a lot of that is informed things like beatboxing, the improv that you mentioned. There are ways in which that has informed freestyle, and so there's some deep roots between the two that are very interesting, from hip hop production to the way rappers rhyme to beatboxing. There, even maybe even some ties between dance of the different eras. There's probably some overlap there as well. So there are a lot of ways that jazz has taught hip hop.
Of course, and I don't want to get too far out of my depth, but like it doesn't start with jazz either, right? Like you could trace those roots all the way back to Africa and the music of the entire African diaspora. So there's threads that go back much, much farther than just like hip hop to jazz and stop. And that's not what you were saying, of course, but for the listeners, yeah, it goes back so much farther.
Yeah, roots of the drum, African griots and storytelling. Yeah, you go much further back. Like that's, jazz and the way that it has spoken and educated hip hop is much more modern, but there's a much deeper history to it.
Right.
And
ancient history, absolutely. Storytelling, drumming. I even think like the sense of time, from all the wonderful polymeters and polyrhythms of African music, traditional African music, all the way to something like Dilla time, and the way that Dilla played with time. It's really wonderful to see those ideas and that freedom pop up in different ways, in different contexts, over and over again. Yeah, that's one of the things I love about it, for sure. It's funny that our questions ended up so parallel. We did not discuss this in advance, but like, we both ended up with last week's show too, like asking kind of these questions about history and influence and
origin,
and tapestry, origin. Yeah.
It's an interesting discussion. You get a deeper sense of a thing when you know where it's come from, what paths it's taken to get where it is.
And with something so complex as both of these topics, like, it can be an intimidating discussion to start. And I'm, again, like I said last week, I'm coming at this stuff as a learner, but it's so important to me. I agree, I think, with you that it's so important to have the conversations and start. You just got to start somewhere learning about this stuff, right? Starting somewhere and adding a piece. It's the only way you get anywhere. Otherwise, you don't start at all.
Yeah, it's, people that are adopted, those people often want to meet their birth parents because it gives them a sense of who they are, right? If they know where they've come from, it gives them a sense of who they are and what their place in the world is. So I think the same is true for hip hop. It's, knowing who its parents, grandparents were and what things they gave to the culture, and how those things speak to what's happening now.
Absolutely. I love tracing out all those connections from city to city to like producer to producer, what musician was on what album, and who made the beat, or who did the mix, who talking to artists and finding out like who they consider their big influences, or who's influential at a pivotal point in their music making or career. I don't know why I'm thinking about this right now, but just as like a tiny little example. So as we're recording, I just talked with Lou Rip like a week or two ago. And in one of those episodes, he mentioned Big Daddy Kane, who I know is a favorite of Royce's. And so I texted Royce the show. I was just like, oh, hey, like Lou mentioned Big Daddy Kane in the show this week. And knowing when Royce, and it's been many years now since he and I had this conversation, but whenever it was that he told me that Kane was one of his favorites, like, that made me go back and listen with a different set of ears. Just, so now I know my friend really loves this artist. I'm going to go back and listen to some of that music with my friend in mind, and that just changed how I heard it,
For sure. Kane is one of those guys that really was kind of a bridge between an earlier period of hip hop to the more modern era of hip hop, that often gets credited to Rakim, and rightly so. But Kane was right there at that time, and he was as big a part as being a revolutionary over how people rhymed as Rakim was, as Cool G Rap was, right? I think those are probably the big three from New York. You can probably add KRS in there as well. But, there was a changing of the guard from that Busy Bee era to that next iteration of hip hop. And Kane was a big part of that. And still, there are many, many people that regard him as a pioneer or regard him as one of their chief influences. Jay-Z will tell you that Kane was, if, Big Daddy Kane is to Jay-Z what Rakim was to Nas. And so, massively influential over him and just a number of other artists. I had the occasion to meet Kane. I was on a brief tour with him. many, many years ago. And just, still seeing him at the top of his form as a performer, many, many, many years after, his heyday was over. And he's still as sharp as he ever was. So that's a guy that I think doesn't get enough credit for how he influenced and helped usher us into this modern era of lyricism.
Yeah, I love turning over those gems, and in a way that's kind of what this whole show is about. If it's about anything, is shining that light a little wider and uncovering some of that stuff for myself, as much as anyone. I don't have a good kind of segue to this, but sort of along those lines. And I talked about Run DMC a little bit earlier, but while I love Run DMC, they fall on the old school side of kind of that evolution we're just talking about with Rakim and Kane to my ears, but they elevated the old school style to such a high level. I still find it just really fun and exciting to listen to. I revisit the Run DMC discography regularly and enjoy it every single time.
Yeah, they're such a big part of hip hop at a certain mesh point where hip hop became a global phenomenon. They were one of the first rap acts that they became rock stars essentially. So that was really one of the first times we saw hip hop in such grandiose terms in terms of artists. Like, we hadn't seen much of that before them, right? They really were the first.
The stardom, yeah.
To become megastars of the culture. So it just, you can't tell the story of hip hop without them. And I think they really were at the front end of hip hop becoming a global culture.
I think that's a cool place to leave it. What do you think?
You can't go wrong with talking about Run DMC and their history. I think that opens up the genre itself to other spaces in the world, to other spaces within the United States. And that's probably, like I said, right around that mesh point where hip hop started to gravitate to other places. So probably brings us full circle to last week's discussion.
Beautiful. Well, Reach, where can people find you? What do you got going on?
Find me on all socials as MC Reach, Facebook, X, Instagram, Threads, MC Reach. You can find me as a producer on SoundCloud, soundcloud.com/TheJohns, DJAWNZ. Doing a lot of different things, but maybe, one of the most important at the moment is just maintaining a stage in Kansas City for artists to perform, MCs and producers. We have a monthly called Sammy Sheets and Friends that we do at Minibar. Our next show is coming up on the 15th of August. It will be an all-women version, so it's ladies' night. It's our second. We did one last year. We're bringing that back again, so we'll have a number of women on this show next weekend.
I don't know if I'm going to get this show out ahead of that date, but it's a monthly series.
So we're there.
So
every
I'll
month.
link to it, and whenever this comes out, listeners, you can check it out in the months to follow. Reach, don't go anywhere, but listeners, I'm going to let you go, and we'll be back next week with something different. Don't know what it'll be on Dat Fury Radio.